Excromation. Our downfall is at our own fault. Our never-ending bloodlust and need for simple resources dragged our species down to the ground, making us turn on each other like savage beasts, which led to the end. I would say this was God's doing, but at this point, I don't even believe he exists. Hell, even if he did exist, is a being willing to create a species so ravenous and murderous even worth our own prayers? Furthermore, why would someone who is so all-loving watch as his children suffered and perished? Many have died since it all started, and I deem it very important to write down what was happened as a guideline as what not to do if the human race miraculously prevails and makes it through this mess. The first day of our downfall was December 25th, 2020. On such a holy day, nobody would expect something so catastrophic to unfold. Scientists for the US military created a new substance that could be used as a weapon. The substance was officially titled as biotoxin chlorine, but was given the nickname Drophums, as the substance would cause those in contact with it to drop to the floor paralyzed, as their skin melted away in mere seconds. The substance was said to be a mix of sulfuric acid, tampered cobra venom, lead, and a few other ingredients that were held confidential to the public. The great thing about Drophums was their versatility. They could be compacted into shells as gun ammunition, or packed into bombs as a method of mass destruction. One scientist created Drophums. The beginning of what we like to call the Decade of Dread began. As expected, this was a span of 10 years, from 2020 to 2030. Although the US government swore that they would not use Drophums unless absolutely needed, reports came in of the US military sneaking the deadly stuff into the battlefield, giving the US a strong advantage. Despite the outcry of the US peoples, using Drophums in wars eventually became a common practice. And although the masses hated the stuff, nobody could deny that Drophums were incredibly effective at bringing rival countries to their knees. By 2023, the countries of China, United Kingdom, Japan, and Australia banded together to stop the US's reign of terror. The countries formed a faction called BRAP, or Biotoxicolorin Removal and Protection, and they had one goal: to stop the United States from being the sole country who had Drophums. The problem with BRAP is that although their intentions seemed admirable, they were actually quite flawed. They decided to attempt to fight fire with fire to stop the US from taking over more countries. By mid-2023, the US had already taken control of 17 other countries, all within a span of 2 years. And all because of the deadly Drophums. The major territories that were captured and moved to the US were Canada, France, Mexico, and Haiti. And the rest were smaller countries taken over only for their natural resources. BRAP eventually found out about the Drophum recipe with the aid of undercover spies, and began making their own Drophum ammo, bombs, etc. Hell, they even made a Drophum sprayer that spewed out the substance in its pure liquid form. BRAP was, for lack of a better word, stacked, and when they tried to combat the powerful US, they were oblivious to the fact that they were about to start what is considered to be World War III. On March 1st, 2025, BRAP attacked without notice on US soils. The BRAP militia attacked San Francisco, and although they were breaking many of the rules of war set in place, they slaughtered thousands. The United States Army was sent down to California, and they responded by massacring the BRAP militia with a plethora of Drophum bullets and sprays. It seemed as though BRAP was dealt with after US defended California, but a mere year later, BRAP used its first Drophum bomb on the US. They attacked the city of Boston, and the bomb pulverized the poor city and all of its inhabitants, along with the majority of Massachusetts. The US responded with a much worse course of action. The US dropped a drop-in bomb in London, England, and sent storms of troops to raid, destroy, and pillage the rest of the United Kingdom. The United States degraded to uncivilized tactics used centuries ago, all for the taste of sweet revenge. On May 22, 2025, BRAP responded in somehow almost worse manner, proving that they were no better than the adversaries. On May 22nd, they drop-in bombed 28 states, the most important being New Texas, New York, California, and Illinois. At this point, what was left of civilization in the afflicted states was in shambles, and many other states were in complete chaos, leading them to branch off and create a new country called the Alliance of Liberty. Because of the rebelling states, the United States fell into utter chaos, leading more states to rebel and leave the US. Because of this, what was left of the US became a war country, focusing only on making weapons and conquering others. Their first DEB attacks were used against the Alliance of Liberty. Caught off guard, the Alliance was dealt with rather quickly, leading many of the rulers of the states inside the Alliance to come crawling back to the US. The US government responded by enslaving all of the civilians in those states and publicly executing their rulers. Blind with rage and fueled by revenge, on January 4th, 2030, the United States made another destructive war tool, but not one many would expect. They attempted and succeeded to create a new disease to ravage many countries that stood before them. The disease was called Excro, and was tested on those who enslaved by the US. To the delight of the US military, the disease was incredibly deadly, and caused an incredibly slow, painful death, all the while leaving the enemy incapacitated. The disease had different effects on different people, and all were deadly. Some exposed to the disease would literally drown in their own vomit within minutes, while others' blood would literally boil, and their organs would for the most part all melt. The best thing about the disease, however, was that it was really easy to spread, as it was found to be airborne. For more study on the diverse effects, the government started taking random slaves or innocent civilians into testing facilities, in which they had cruel experiments done on them. One such cruel experiment had the subject pinned down to a table by nails, and then they had their arms ripped off and their bloody stumps injected with Excro. The most sadistic part of all was this, however, that it was all done without anesthesia or any other medical supplements to reduce pain. There were many more tests conducted, and the United States' unquenchable thirst for blood led to the majority of the United States citizens being tested upon and killed, making the US literally a military country and nothing more. Some sadomasochists over in the US military came up with the genius idea of combining drop-ins with Excro to make some sort of biological bomb. The US government was euphoric upon hearing the idea and decided to see if the two could mix together. At first, they were dismayed, as the two would not mix. However, with some tinkering by some of the leading scientists in the United States, the homegrown disease and drop-ins were able to mix correctly, to the joy of the US. The first test subject for the bioweapon was conducted on a person who submitted the idea in the first place, and the bioweapon worked just as planned, if not better. This combination of destruction became the most catastrophic weapon of mass destruction, and led to what we call the Age of the Apocalypse. The United States, still enraged by the bombs dropped on by BRAP in the years prior, launched its first Drop 'em and Excro bombs, or DEEB, in Hong Kong, China on August 14th, 2031. The bomb obliterated nearly all of China, and those who survived the explosion were infected by Excro, leading to their demise. Or at least that was what was supposed to happen. After word spread out about China's ruined country, the United Kingdom sent out investigators in protected armor to search what was left of China. To their shock, the cities and towns were ruined, but strange people with black skin and large red spots were roaming in the demolished country. When provoked, the strange people went AWOL and attacked the investigators, and eventually cannibalized them. Only one investigator made it back to tell Scottish officials what had occurred. Soon, a fleet of UK soldiers were sent in to combat the strange inhabitants, and were also searching for survivors. After hours of searching, the soldiers found a small group of survivors, all who buried themselves underground during the explosion. Once brought up to the polluted Chinese air, all of them began coughing as they dropped to the ground. The dim-witted soldiers had forgotten that the air was infected and led the survivors to their doom. Once they died of suffocation, the survivors, all in unison, got up and red boils began to appear as their skin turned into a tarred, pitch black. The soldiers fled and ran for their lives, never to return to the forsaken country of China. To get rid of all the infected people, the UK dropped a nuclear bomb on China, but the infected people seemed to bask in the radiation and ran towards the explosion like moths to a flame. The most surprising aspect of this was the fact that they all escaped from the deadly explosion unscathed. The soldiers who returned to the UK were fine, or so the doctors thought, and they were allowed into the public after a few weeks of quarantine. Little did they know that even coming into contact with those infected would lead to the eventual death and transformation. Within a few days after being released, the soldiers all became strange monsters they had just confronted days before, and they spread their disease to the rest of the country. This was a serious pandemic, and in the center of it was England, so the UK had no other choice but to drop a DEB on the area, so they could at least melt the disfigured monsters that killed millions. However, the attempts at ending the disease with DEBs were futile, and those infected only appeared to become more ravenous the more they were bombed. Soon, even the British government was infected, leading to anarchy and absolute chaos. The process in which people transform into disease-ridden monsters came to be known as Excromation. The United States, seeing what that one bomb did to an entire nation, became mad with power. To them, you were either with them or against them, and in both circumstances, your country would likely be destroyed. The next target of the United States' wrath was Japan. Japan, luckily, was prepared for such an event and provided underground shelters for their civilians to protect them from the blasts. Unfortunately, when the inevitable came and all bombs dropped, the leaders of Japan weren't able to get to shelter in time, and they all perished. Foolishly, and with no leaders, the Japanese citizens walked out into their fallen country mere moments after the bombs had dropped, leading to all of their untimely demises. The few people still underground were found by what we call the excromorphs, those infected with excro, and were said to have been eaten alive and kicking. The only remains found of them were skeletons, of which had been gnawed on, and in many cases shattered. At this point, the United States had just about every country as either a part of the US or as a demolished wreck. The US next set its eyes on Australia, which wasn't so easy to be taken down. The Australian government already had begun construction on a safe underground area where almost all of the citizens could live and stay unaffected from a blast of a bomb of any caliber. The area was started back when drop bombs were first created, just in case something like this was to occur. When the bombs were dropped, everyone was safe and sound in their own little underground community. But there was one problem. The underground society wasn't completely finished yet, and thus a safe space. Many innocent people were banished out into the unforgiving, polluted terrain of Australia. Another major problem was that not all of the food had yet been imported, so the survivors still only had about a month before food ran out, leading to either starvation or cannibalization. The Australian public chose the latter. Those who were weak, sick, or obese were eaten first, the higher class citizens getting first pickings. Eventually, the cannibalization chain went down the line until only about a fourth of the population remained. Brothers were eating their sisters, parents were eating their children. It was just absolute mayhem. In the end, many people decided death was a better option and purged themselves all out in the wrongdoings by venturing out into the polluted wasteland they had once called home. America had done it. They had successfully eliminated all opposing countries and were alone in the world to prosper. Soon, the United States' jovial expressions were changed to looks of horror as they found out something that led to the end of society as we knew it. Australia had numerous spies in the United States, many of whom were eventually made into highly powerful members of the government. However, by the end of the war, they'd found out just about every spy there was, making a message out to them by conducting inhumane experiments on them, or performing degrading medieval torture methods, or executions on them, such as the Brazen Bull or saw torture. Out of all spies found, the US could not find the most dangerous spy Australia had, and he had already become a highly powerful part of the government. Once word broke out about Australia's citizens being completely killed off and their country completely destroyed, the spy went insane. He made his way into DEB controlling areas and set up all bombs in the US had in their possession to launch into and around all the areas the US controlled. The bombs were deployed, and just like that, the United States' fate was sealed. The problem, above all for the United States, was that they never had to worry about being the target of those bombs, as they were always in control. Thus, they foolishly had no shelters for the United States citizens and themselves. They watched in horror as the countdown to doomsday ticked down. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. An incredibly loud sound was heard in the distance, and a cloud of soot and dust was on the horizon. Within seconds, the White House was engulfed in flames, and all inside were smothered in dust and ridden with disease. The world had fallen to pieces. The date is, I think, June 2nd. No, actually, wait. June 13th, 2056. There are believed to be around 100 people still alive on Earth, and all of us are on the brink of death. We were all born somehow immune to the disease, if airborne. but not when consumed, leaving us really to just starve as all food and wildfire are contaminated with excro. There are more cases of excromation every day, and even the excromorphs themselves would rather starve than eat our frail, broken bodies. It's harder to breathe every day, as smoke and rubble slowly smother and suffocate us. I know I am on the brink of death. I can somehow feel it. So take these as my final words. A warning, if you will. If the human race survives this nightmare, we cannot become greedy and corrupted like we were before. We need to work together, stop fighting in useless goddamn wars, and shape up as a country. Yes, I know that sounds cheesy as all hell, but I see it as really the only way that any of us can survive.